The flames licked at the midnight sky, casting an eerie orange glow over the Montana landscape that made Piper Rowan's heart seize with terror as she pressed her body against the farthest wall of her cabin. Her 3 young children huddled behind her like frightened rabbits. The fire had appeared out of nowhere, a vengeful demon born from a lightning strike that had found the dry tinder surrounding their isolated homestead just outside Helena. "Mama, I'm scared," 6-year-old Emma whimpered, her small fingers digging into Piper's skirts. At her side, 4-year-old Samuel clung to his older sister's arm, his eyes wide with terror, while 2-year-old Lily wailed from Piper's desperate embrace. "SH now," Piper whispered, trying to keep her voice steady despite the panic threatening to overwhelm her. "We'll be fine." But the words rang hollow as the flames consumed the front porch and began to eat away at the wooden walls of the only home they had known since her husband's passing 18 months ago. The smoke was thickening, billowing through the cracks in the cabin walls and seeping under the door like poisonous fog. Emma began to cough, and Piper knew with sinking certainty that they had precious little time left. The windows were too small for her to fit through, and the only door led directly into the inferno that had once been their front room. 20 miles away, Hank Thornton urged his horse faster as he spotted the glow on the horizon. The cowboy had been riding back to the Diamond T Ranch after delivering a message to a neighboring spread when he saw it the telltale sign of a wildfire. His gut clenched with dread as he realized the blaze was in the direction of the Rowan homestead. He had only spoken to the widow Rowan a handful of times at church socials and in town, but there was something about the quiet strength in her blue eyes that had stuck with him. She was raising 3 little ones alone on that hardscrabble piece of land, refusing all offers of charity with a determined lift of her chin that both frustrated and impressed him. "Come on, Thunder," he urged his stallion, leaning low over the horse's neck as they galloped toward the glow. "Let's go." The heat hit Hank like a physical blow as he approached the burning homestead. The barn was already engulfed, and the modest cabin was rapidly surrendering to the flames. A shrill scream from inside froze his blood. "Hello, anyone in there?" He shouted, dismounting Thunder and securing him to a fence post far enough from the flames to be safe. "Help! We're trapped!" came a woman's desperate cry, barely audible above the roar of the fire. Without hesitation, Hank pulled his bandana over his nose and mouth, soaked it quickly from his canteen, and dashed toward the burning building. The door was blocked by a fallen beam, already aflame. Using all his strength, he heaved it aside, ignoring the searing pain as embers rained down on his arms and shoulders. Inside, the smoke was so thick he could barely see, but he heard the coughing coming from the back room. Crouching low, he navigated through the burning front room, past the kitchen table where a half-finished meal still sat, past the small shelf of books that were beginning to smolder, until he reached the door to the bedroom. "Mrs. Rowan," he called, pushing it open. The sight of Piper huddled in the corner with 3 terrified children made his heart contract. She looked up, recognition and relief flooding her ash-streaked face. "Mr. Thornton," she gasped. "I'm getting you out," he said firmly, then glanced at the children. "All of you." He reached for the smallest child. "Give me the baby first." Piper hesitated only a moment before passing Lily to him. "Her name is Lily," she said, as if it were important he know this small person he was about to save. "Hello, Lily," he said gently, tucking the sobbing toddler against his chest. "Hold tight, little one." With one arm securely around the child, he used his free hand to pull his damp bandana from his face and placed it over Lily's nose and mouth instead. "I'll be right back for the others," he promised Piper, their eyes locking for a brief, intense moment before he turned and plunged back into the burning front room. The heat was unbearable, the roar deafening as the fire consumed the little cabin. Hank shielded Lily with his body, navigating through the maze of flames. A burning beam crashed down inches from him, showering them with sparks. The child screamed, but Hank pressed on, his boots crunching over debris, his lungs burning with each breath. Finally, they burst through the doorway into the night air. Hank ran several yards away from the building before gently setting Lily down beneath a large oak tree. "Stay here, Lily. I'm going to get your mama and your brother and sister," he said firmly, looking into her tear-filled eyes to make sure she understood. She nodded, still clutching the damp bandana to her face. Without pausing to catch his breath, Hank turned and ran back toward the inferno. The structure was deteriorating rapidly now, the roof beginning to sag ominously. He knew he had precious little time. The front room was nearly impassable on his second journey, the furniture now fully ablaze and the heat so intense he felt his skin might blister. He dropped to his knees, crawling beneath the worst of the smoke, ignoring the pain as his palms pressed into hot embers scattered across the floor. When he reached the bedroom again, Piper was coughing violently, her eyes streaming. Samuel had passed out in her arms while Emma clung desperately to her mother's skirts, wheezing with each breath. "The boy next," Hank ordered, taking the unconscious child from Piper's arms. "You keep the girl close. I'll be right back." This time the journey out was even more treacherous. The ceiling began to collapse in sections, and Hank had to sidestep and dodge as he carried Samuel's limp form. A burning splinter of wood sliced across his cheek, and he felt warm blood mixing with the sweat and soot, but he pushed forward relentlessly. When they emerged into the night air, Hank ran to where he had left Lily. The toddler was right where he had placed her, still clutching his bandana and watching the burning house with wide, terrified eyes. He laid Samuel gently beside her. "Your brother needs fresh air." "I'm going to get your mama and sister now," he told Lily, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze before turning once more toward the cabin that was rapidly becoming a death trap. The third trip was the worst. The roof was collapsing in earnest now, and the heat was so intense Hank could feel the hair on his arms singing. He couldn't see through the thick smoke and had to navigate by memory and touch, feeling his way along what remained of the walls. "Mrs. Rowan." He called out, his voice rough from the smoke. "Piper," a faint response guided him to them. The bedroom ceiling had partially caved in, and he found Piper trapped beneath a beam, still protecting Emma with her body. "My leg," she gasped. "I can't move." Hank assessed the situation quickly. The beam wasn't burning yet, but it soon would be. With a grunt of effort, he lifted it enough for Piper to slide her leg free. "Can you walk?" he asked, already taking Emma from her arms. Piper tried to stand but collapsed with a cry of pain. "Go," she urged, pushing Emma toward him. "Take her first." "I'm coming back for you," Hank promised, locking eyes with her. "I'm not leaving you here." He clutched Emma tightly, and they made their way through what was now little more than a tunnel of flame. The girl buried her face in his shoulder, trembling violently but not making a sound. Hank felt a surge of admiration for her courage even as he worried about Piper, left behind in the disintegrating structure. When they reached safety, he set Emma down with her siblings. Samuel was conscious now, coughing but alert. Lily had curled up against her brother, her thumb in her mouth, eyes fixed on the burning cabin where her mother remained. "Your mama's coming too," Hank assured them, already turning back toward the fire. "I promise." The cabin was barely standing for Hank's final trip inside. The doorway had collapsed entirely, and he had to create a new entrance by kicking through a weakened section of the burning wall. Inside, The smoke was so thick he couldn't see his hand in front of his face. He dropped to his belly, crawling across the hot floorboards, calling Piper's name. He found her where he had left her, semi-conscious now from smoke inhalation. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. "Stay with me, Piper," he urged, struggling to his feet with her weight. "Your children need you." Her eyes fluttered open, fixing on his face with desperate intensity. "Thank you," she whispered. Their exit route was blocked by fallen, burning timbers. Hank turned, searching frantically for another way out as the remaining sections of roof groaned ominously above them. He spotted a window, its glass already shattered by the heat. It would be a tight fit, but it was their only chance. "Hold on to me," he instructed, shifting Piper to secure her more firmly in his arms. With a surge of desperate strength, Hank kicked out the remaining shards of glass and wooden frame, then maneuvered Piper through the opening first, trying to shield her from the jagged edges. He followed immediately after, tumbling with her onto the ground outside just as the cabin gave a final groan and collapsed entirely in a shower of sparks and flame. They lay there for a moment, gasping for air, their bodies pressed together on the cool earth. Then Hank gathered her into his arms once more and carried her to where the children waited, their small faces illuminated by the light of their burning home. "Mama!" Emma cried, as Hank gently set Piper down. The family clung together, sobbing with relief while Hank stood watching, his body suddenly registering all the burns and cuts he had sustained. But seeing the four of them alive, holding each other beneath the Montana stars, made every bit of pain worthwhile. "Mr. Thornton," Piper said, looking up at him with eyes shining with tears and gratitude, "you saved us." Hank knelt beside them, his voice rough with emotion and smoke. "Let's get you all to town. The doctor needs to look at that leg." As he helped them onto Thunder, arranging Piper with Lily in her arms while Emma and Samuel rode double behind them, Hank glanced back at the smoldering ruins of the Rowan homestead. Everything they owned was gone, consumed by the merciless flames. But as Piper's arms tightened around his waist when he mounted in front of her, he made a silent vow that they wouldn't face the future alone. The journey to Helena was slow and painful. Hank led Thunder carefully through the darkness, mindful of his precious cargo. Behind him, Piper fought to stay conscious, the pain in her leg competing with the burning in her lungs. The children had fallen into an exhausted sleep, their small bodies swaying with the horse's gentle movement. "How much further?" Piper asked, her voice barely a whisper against Hank's shoulder. "Not far now," he assured her, though in truth they were still a good hour from town. "Try to rest." "The children are safe," he finished firmly. "Thanks to you." She shook her head slightly, her forehead pressing against his back. "Thanks to you, Mr. Thornton." "Hank," he corrected gently. "I think we're past formalities, Mrs. Rowan." "Piper," she whispered, and he felt her body relax slightly against him. The first hints of dawn were lightening the eastern sky when they finally reached the outskirts of Helena. The town was still quiet, most of its residents not yet risen for the day's work. Hank rode directly to Doc Simmons' house, dismounting carefully before helping Piper and the children down. He pounded on the doctor's door, ignoring the stares of the few early risers on the street who were shocked by the sight of the soot-covered Cowboy and family. Doc Simmons answered on the third knock, his gray hair disheveled and eyes bleary with sleep, but he snapped to alertness at the sight before him. "Good Lord, what happened?" he asked, ushering them inside. "Fire at the Rowan homestead," Hank explained tersely. "Mrs. Rowan's leg is injured, and they've all breathed in a lot of smoke." The doctor's small waiting room soon became a flurry of activity as he examined each of them in turn. Piper's leg wasn't broken, but she had a severe sprain and burns that needed treatment. The children had fared better, with only minor burns and the effects of smoke inhalation to contend with. Hank refused treatment for himself until everyone else had been seen to, ignoring the doctor's concerned looks at the burns on his arms and the cut on his cheek. "You're a lucky bunch," Doc Simmons declared finally, binding Piper's leg. "Another hour in that smoke and I might have been burying you instead." Piper's eyes sought Hank's across the room, where he sat with Lily asleep in his lap and Emma and Samuel leaning against him on either side. The connection between them was palpable, forged in fire and desperation. "What now, Mama?" Emma asked quietly, voicing the question that hung heavily in the air. "Our house is gone." Before Piper could answer, a soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Simmons, the doctor's wife, entered with Martha Baker, the owner of the town's only boarding house. "We've heard what happened," Martha said, her kind face creased with concern. "I've got rooms ready for you and the little ones, Piper. No charge until you get back on your feet." "I couldn't possibly," Piper began to protest, but Martha waved her objection away. "Nonsense. This town takes care of its own." She turned to Hank, taking in his burned clothing and exhausted face. "You too, Mr. Thornton. You look dead on your feet." Hank shook his head. "I need to get back to the Diamond Tea. Mr. Tyler will be wondering where I've been all night." "Bart Tyler can wait," Doc Simmons said firmly. "You need rest and treatment for those burns, young man." Hank wanted to argue, but the weight of Lily in his arms and the beseeching look in Piper's eyes stopped him. He nodded reluctantly. "Just for a few hours," he conceded. By mid-morning they were settled in Martha's boarding house. The town had already begun rallying around the Rowans, with women bringing clothes for the children and men planning a trip to salvage what they could from the homestead and assess whether rebuilding was possible. Hank had been given a small room at the end of the hall, where he collapsed onto the narrow bed after Doc Simmons treated his burns. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flames and heard the terrified cries of children. He kept reliving those 3 desperate trips into the burning cabin, the weight of Piper in his arms as they escaped just moments before the roof collapsed. A soft knock at his door roused him from his troubled thoughts. He sat up, wincing at the pull of bandages on his burned skin. "Come in," he called. The door opened to reveal Piper, balancing on a crutch the doctor had provided. Her face was scrubbed clean, though faint smudges of soot still shadowed her hairline. Someone had given her a simple blue dress to replace her smoke-damaged clothing, and her honey-blonde hair was neatly braided over one shoulder. "The children are finally asleep," she said, hovering in the doorway. "May I speak with you?" Hank stood quickly, gesturing to the room's only chair. "Please sit down. You shouldn't be on that leg." She moved into the room, closing the door softly behind her. As she settled into the chair, Hank noticed the tremble in her hands and the sheen of unshed tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she began, her voice catching. "What you did, running into that fire, not once but 3 times, I've never seen such courage." Hank shook his head, embarrassed by her praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most men would have looked at that inferno and decided it was hopeless." She paused, her blue eyes searching his face. "You saved my children. You saved me. We owe you our lives." "You don't owe me anything," Hank insisted, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I'm just glad I was passing by when I was." "Providence," she murmured. "That's what Reverend Miller would call it. God sent you to us in our darkest hour." Something about her words touched Hank deeply. He'd never considered himself a particularly religious man, but in that moment, he couldn't help but wonder if some higher power had indeed guided him to the Rowan homestead that night. How are the little ones holding up? He asked, changing the subject. A shadow crossed Piper's face. They're frightened, confused. Everything they knew is gone. She twisted her hands in her lap. I don't know what I'm going to do, Mr. Thornton. That land was all we had after my husband passed. I don't have the means to rebuild, and I can't impose on Martha's generosity forever. Hank, he reminded her gently, and you're not alone in this. The whole town is already organizing to help. It's too much, she protested. We can't accept charity. It's not charity when it's neighbors helping neighbors, Hank argued. Besides, I've got some savings. I'd be happy to, no, Piper interrupted, her spine straightening with pride. You've done more than enough already. I couldn't possibly take your money. Hank recognized the stubborn set of her jaw. It was the same expression he'd seen when other ranchers' wives had tried to give her hand-me-downs for the children at church socials, or when the mercantile owner had offered to extend her credit after James Rowan's death. Her pride was as fierce as her love for her children. At least let me help with the rebuilding, he offered. I'm handy with a hammer and Mr. Tyler owes me some time off. Before she could object further, a small voice called from the hallway. Mama, Piper rose quickly, grimacing as she put weight on her injured leg. Hank was at her side in an instant, steadying her with a hand at her elbow. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through him, and from the quick intake of her breath, he suspected she felt it too. The door creaked open to reveal Emma in a borrowed nightgown, her red-rimmed eyes wide with distress. I had a bad dream, she whispered. The fire came back and took you away. Piper reached for her daughter, but Hank moved first, crouching down to the child's level despite the protest of his burned arms. Your mama is safe, he said gently. And you know what? I bet if you look out that window down the hall, you can see the stars are keeping watch tonight. No fire would dare come back with them standing guard. Emma regarded him solemnly. Do you promise? Cross my heart, Hank said, making the gesture. Why don't we go check on those stars together, and then get you back to bed? Emma slipped her small hand into his much larger one, and the trust in that simple gesture nearly undid him. He glanced up to find Piper watching them, something soft and wondering in her expression. Together, they walked to the window at the end of the hall. Hank lifted Emma up so she could see the vast Montana sky painted with countless stars. See, he said, they're all up there, keeping watch over you and your mama and your brother and sister. And you too? Emma asked, turning her head to look at him. And me too, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. Good, she declared. Because you're our hero, Mr. Hank, and heroes need stars to watch over them too. From behind them, Piper made a soft sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. When Hank turned, still holding Emma, he saw that tears were flowing freely down her cheeks now. Without thinking, he shifted Emma to one arm and reached out with his free hand to brush away Piper's tears. No more crying tonight, he said softly. Tomorrow is a new day, and we'll face it together. The word together hung in the air between them, filled with possibilities neither was ready to name. But as they stood there in the quiet hallway, beneath the watchful stars, something new began to take root, something that, like the wildfire, had appeared suddenly and with tremendous force, but unlike the flames, promised to build rather than destroy. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. The men of Helena, led by Sheriff Wallace, rode out to the Rowan homestead to assess the damage and salvage what they could. They returned with grim faces and a wagon containing pitifully few items. A scorched trunk with family photographs, a singed Bible that had somehow survived beneath a fallen beam, and a collection of metal cooking pots and tools that had withstood the heat. Piper received the meager remnants of her life with quiet dignity. Though Hank, watching from across the street, saw how her hands trembled as she opened the Bible to find her children's birth dates recorded inside in her late husband's handwriting. True to his word, Hank had spoken to Bart Tyler about taking some time off from his duties at the Diamond T. The ranch owner, moved by the story of the fire and Hank's heroism, not only agreed but also donated lumber from the ranch's surplus for rebuilding the Rowan cabin. "You've been working yourself to the bone for 5 years with barely a day off," Bart had said gruffly. "Take the month. Help that widow and her young-uns. The cattle will still be here when you get back." Word of Bart's generosity spread through town, inspiring others to contribute. The mercantile owner offered nails and hardware at cost. The blacksmith promised new hinges for doors and shutters. The women of Helena organized a quilting bee to replace the bedding lost in the fire. Hank threw himself into coordinating these efforts, spending his days riding between town and the homestead, where a crew of volunteers had begun clearing the charred remains of the cabin in preparation for rebuilding. His evenings were spent at the boarding house, where he found himself drawn to the small parlor where Piper sat mending donated clothes for the children or reading to them before bedtime. He told himself he was just checking in on them, making sure they had everything they needed. But the truth was simpler and more complex all at once. He couldn't stay away. Something about Piper Rowan and her 3 children had worked its way into his heart, filling spaces he hadn't realized were empty. 1 week after the fire, Hank was helping Emma and Samuel feed the chickens behind Martha's boarding house when Piper found him. She had discarded the crutch 2 days earlier, though she still walked with a noticeable limp. "The sheriff just came by," she said, watching as Samuel giggled at a particularly determined hen pecking corn from his palm. "He says they've determined what caused the fire." Hank straightened, brushing chicken feed from his hands. "What was it?" "Lightning," she replied, her gaze moving to the horizon where storm clouds were gathering again. "It struck a tree near the barn, and the sparks caught in the dry grass." Hank nodded. It made sense they'd had an unusually dry summer, and lightning fires were common in Montana. "At least it wasn't something preventable," he offered. "Nothing you could have done differently." "That's what the sheriff said." She hesitated, then added quietly, "He also said. He said if you hadn't come when you did, they would have found 4 bodies in the ashes." The blunt statement hit Hank like a physical blow. He'd known how close it had been, of course, but hearing it stated so plainly made his knees weak with belated fear. "Mama, look," Samuel called, oblivious to the heavy moment between the adults. "This chicken likes me best." Piper summoned a smile for her son. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Maybe she'll lay an extra egg just for you tomorrow." Emma, more perceptive than her younger brother, looked between her mother and Hank with curious eyes. "Are you going to marry Mr. Hank, Mama?" she asked suddenly. Piper's face flooded with color. "Emma, what a question to ask." "But Sarah Miller said her mama said that Mr. Hank saved us because he's sweet on you," Emma persisted, "and that when a man is sweet on a lady, they get married." Hank couldn't help the laugh that escaped him, though his own cheeks felt uncomfortably warm. "I think Mrs. Miller might be getting ahead of things a bit, Emma," he said gently. "So you're not sweet on Mama?" the girl asked, her forehead creasing in confusion. Hank found himself trapped by the directness of a child's question and the watchful gaze of a woman who suddenly seemed to be holding her breath. The truth hovered on his lips, demanding to be spoken. "I think your mama is one of the bravest, strongest women I've ever met," he said carefully. "And I'd count myself lucky to have a friend like her." It wasn't a direct answer, but Emma seemed satisfied, returning her attention to the chickens. Piper, however, continued to study his face as if searching for something more. A rumble of thunder broke the moment. Hank glanced at the gathering clouds. Storm's coming. We should head inside. As they herded the children toward the boarding house, Piper's hand brushed against Hank's, a touch so light it might have been accidental if not for the way her fingers briefly curled around his before letting go. "Thank you," she murmured, "for being our friend." The word friend felt simultaneously too little and too much for what was growing between them. But Hank merely nodded, not trusting himself to speak as they stepped into the warm shelter of Martha's kitchen, the first heavy raindrops beginning to fall behind them. The storm that arrived that evening was fierce, with lightning illuminating the sky and thunder rattling the windows of the boarding house. The children, still traumatized by the fire, were inconsolable, especially little Lily, who screamed with each thunderclap. Martha, practical and kind, had moved a trundle bed into Piper's room for the 3 children, but even all sleeping together didn't calm their fears. Around midnight, Hank, unable to sleep himself, heard soft sobbing from their room as he passed in the hallway. Without thinking, he knocked gently on the door. Piper opened it, looking exhausted, with Lily clutching her neck and the other 2 children huddled on the bed behind her, their eyes wide with fear. "I thought I heard crying," Hank said unnecessarily. "The storm," Piper explained, bouncing Lily gently in a futile attempt to soothe her. "They keep thinking the fire is coming back." Hank hesitated only a moment before making an offer. "My pa used to tell the best stories during storms, said they drowned out the thunder with wonder. Would it help if—" "Please," Piper said, the single word filled with gratitude. And so Hank found himself sitting on the edge of the children's bed, spinning tales of magical horses that could outrun lightning and brave little mice who weren't afraid of anything, because they knew how to find the silver lining in every cloud. As he talked, the children's eyes grew heavy, their bodies relaxing. Even Lily, curled in her mother's lap, began to drift off, her thumb firmly in her mouth. "And the littlest mouse," Hank said, his voice soft now as he watched Samuel's eyelids drooping, "knew that sometimes the scariest things can lead us to the most wonderful discoveries if we're brave enough to keep going." "Like you," Emma murmured sleepily. "You were brave in the fire and you found us." Hank swallowed hard, touching her hair gently. "That's right, and I'm very glad I did." When all 3 children were finally asleep, Hank stood to leave, but Piper caught his hand. "Stay," she whispered. "Just until the storm passes. I don't want to be alone with my thoughts tonight." He should have refused. Propriety demanded it, but the vulnerability in her eyes and the lingering fear from the fire overrode such considerations. He nodded, settling into the rocking chair by the window while Piper curled up on the bed beside her sleeping children. They talked softly through the night as the storm raged outside, sharing pieces of themselves in the intimate darkness. Hank told her about growing up in Wyoming, the son of a horse trainer, who had taught him everything he knew about animals but little about people. He spoke of coming to Montana 5 years ago, seeking something he couldn't name, finding work at the Diamond Tea and a kind of peace in the wide open spaces. Piper shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, her journey west with James after their wedding, and the joy and terror of building a life in the Montana wilderness. She spoke of James's death from pneumonia, the awful weight of grief, and the determination to keep going for her children's sake. "I never thought I'd feel anything again except worry and exhaustion," she confessed, her voice barely audible above the rain. "But when you carried Emma from that fire, and I saw the way you looked at her like she was precious to you even though you barely knew her, I felt something crack open inside me, something I thought had died with James." Hank's heart pounded so hard he wondered if she could hear it. "Piper, you don't have to say anything," she interrupted. I know it's too soon and probably foolish besides. A widow with 3 children is hardly a catch, and you have your life at the Diamond Tea and the town will talk." "Piper," he said more firmly, moving from the chair to kneel beside the bed, close enough that he could see her eyes shining in the dim light from the window. "Do you think I care about any of that?" She studied his face, searching for reassurance. "You should. Your reputation. My reputation is the least important thing in the world compared to how I feel when I see you with your children, or when you smile, or when you stand up straight and refuse help even when you need it, because you're the most stubbornly independent woman I've ever met." A small laugh escaped her, though her eyes were serious. "And how do you feel?" Hank took a deep breath. "Like I've been wandering for years, and suddenly I've found a place worth stopping for." The confession hung between them, honest and raw. Piper's hand moved from the blanket to cover his where it rested on the edge of the bed. The touch was innocent enough, but the current that passed between them was anything but. "I'm not asking for promises," she whispered. "Not yet. We barely know each other." "Then let me get to know you," Hank replied. "Let me help rebuild your home, and while we're at it, maybe we can build something else too. Something that doesn't have to be named or hurried." She smiled then, a real smile that reached her eyes and made something in Hank's chest expand until he thought it might burst. "I'd like that," she said softly. Outside, the storm began to subside, the space between lightning and thunder growing longer as it moved away to the east. Inside the small room at Martha Baker's boarding house, something new and fragile and full of promise had taken root, nurtured by shared danger and quiet confessions in the dark. The rebuilding of the Rowan homestead became a community affair. Every day, men from town would ride out to the property to work, while the women organized meals for the workers and continued collecting necessities for when the family could return home. Hank was there from dawn till dusk, directing the work with a quiet authority that earned him the respect of even the most experienced builders. The new cabin would be slightly larger than the original, with a proper bedroom for Piper and space for the children to grow. At Hank's insistence, they were using stone for the fireplace instead of the original wood construction, a precaution against future fires that everyone approved. Piper rode out to the homestead as often as her healing leg allowed, sometimes bringing the children to see the progress. Watching them explore the skeleton of their new home, Hank could see both excitement and anxiety in their young faces. The land around the cabin still bore the black scars of the fire, a constant reminder of what they had lost and how close they had come to losing everything. One evening in late September, nearly 3 weeks after the fire, Hank stayed behind when the other workers departed. The cabin's exterior was complete, the roof on and secure, and most of the interior walls framed. Another week would see it ready for the Rowans to move in. He was measuring lumber for shelves when he heard the sound of a horse approaching. Stepping outside, he saw Piper riding alone, her figure silhouetted against the setting sun. "No children today," he called as she dismounted, noting that she could do so without wincing now. "Martha offered to watch them so I could have some time to myself," she explained, tying her horse beside his. "I thought I'd come see how things are progressing." They walked through the cabin together, Piper running her hands over the fresh-cut wood and peering out the newly installed windows at the land that was both familiar and changed. "It's beautiful," she said, turning to Hank with genuine appreciation. "Better than before." "We tried to keep it similar to what you had," Hank said, "but with a few improvements. The roof is stronger and the stone fireplace will be safer." "It's not just the building," Piper clarified, her gaze steady on his face. "It's knowing that so many people cared enough to help." "That you cared enough," Hank shrugged, uncomfortable as always with gratitude. This is what neighbors do. Is that all we are, Hank? Neighbors? The directness of the question caught him off guard. Since that night during the storm, they had been careful with each other, building a friendship on shared work and quiet conversations, both aware of the growing attraction between them, but neither rushing to define it. The children had adopted Hank as a fixture in their lives, running to him with their small triumphs and worries, and he had responded with a natural ease that sometimes surprised even him. But they hadn't spoken again of what might be developing between them until now. "No," Hank admitted, moving closer to her. "That's not all we are." The light from the setting sun streamed through the western window, painting Piper's honey-blonde hair with gold and warming her fair skin. She looked strong and vulnerable all at once, a woman who had faced the worst and emerged scarred but undefeated. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady despite the flush rising in her cheeks, "about what Emma asked that day with the chickens." Hank's heart skipped a beat. "About me being sweet on you?" "Yes." She met his gaze directly. "And I've been wondering if perhaps she saw something the rest of us were too cautious to name." "Piper," Hank began, then stopped, unsure how to put his feelings into words. He was a man of action, not flowery speeches. "I'm not good at this sort of thing." "Neither am I," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I thought about caring for someone. After James died, I couldn't imagine ever wanting that again. The risk of loss seemed too great." "And now?" Hank asked, scarcely breathing. "Now I think about that night in the fire," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "How you came back for us, again and again. How you could have died. And I realize that life is too short and too precious to let fear make our decisions for us." She took a step toward him, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used and see the tiny flecks of darker blue in her eyes. "I'm not afraid anymore, Hank. Not of fire, not of starting over, and not of what I feel when I'm with you." The last of Hank's hesitation dissolved at her words. He reached for her, one hand cupping her face with a gentleness that belied the calluses on his palm. "Piper Rowan, I've been falling in love with you since the moment I carried you out of that burning cabin." Her eyes widened at the declaration, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. "I think I've been falling in love with you too," she whispered, "though I've been trying very hard not to. Why fight it?" Hank asked, his thumb brushing lightly across her cheekbone. "Because it feels too soon. Because the children have already lost so much. Because the town will talk. Because I'm afraid of needing someone again and then losing them." Each reason was valid, and Hank respected her too much to dismiss them. "All true," he acknowledged. "And yet here we are." "Here we are," she echoed, and there was a note of wonder in her voice. The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility. Then, with a courage that matched the night he had run into the flames, Hank lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them uncertain after so long without this kind of connection. But then Piper's arms slid around his neck, and Hank pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and affirming and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Hank rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to rush you," he said. "I know you need time. The children need time." "They adore you already," Piper pointed out, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck. "It's not the same as having a new father," Hank countered. "That's a big change, and you're right that people will talk. A courtship of a few months would be more proper." Piper laughed softly. "Since when do you care about propriety, Hank Thornton? You spent the night in my bedroom during that storm." "In a chair," he reminded her, smiling. "And only because the children were frightened." "And because I asked you to stay," she added, more serious now. I'm asking again, Hank, not just for tonight, but for all the nights to come. Stay with us. Be part of our family." The simplicity and directness of her proposal took his breath away. This was Piper, straightforward, honest, uninterested in games or conventional expectations when they conflicted with what she knew to be right. "Are you sure?" he asked, searching her face for any trace of doubt. "I've never been more certain of anything," she replied. "Life is too short for unnecessary waiting, and we've already faced the worst together. What could be more binding than that?" Hank couldn't argue with her logic, nor did he want to. The prospect of waking up each morning with Piper beside him and the children calling for breakfast was suddenly the only future he could imagine wanting. "Then yes," he said simply. "Yes to staying. Yes to family. Yes to everything with you, Piper." Her smile was radiant as she pulled him down for another kiss, this one sealed with certainty rather than question. Around them, the new cabin seemed to hold its breath, ready to become a home once more, not just for a widow and her children, but for a family being forged anew from the ashes of loss and the brave decision to love again. News of Hank and Piper's engagement spread through Helena faster than the wildfire had consumed the original Rowan homestead. As predicted, there was talk some disapproving of the hasty courtship, others romanticizing the dramatic circumstances of their meeting, but most simply happy that the young widow and her children would have a protector and provider. Martha Baker, their staunchest ally, silenced the worst of the gossips with a stern reminder that life on the frontier had its own rules, and that love was too precious to be governed by arbitrary timetables set by those who had never faced death by fire. Reverend Miller, after a long private conversation with the couple, agreed to perform the ceremony as soon as the cabin was complete. "God has clearly brought you together for a purpose," he told them. "Who am I to stand in the way of divine providence?" The children, as Piper had predicted, were delighted by the news. Emma and Samuel immediately began calling Hank Pa, though he gently suggested they might want to wait until after the wedding. Lily, too young to understand marriage but deeply attached to the man who had carried her from the flames, simply clung to Hank whenever he was near, as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. The only shadow on their happiness came from an unexpected quarter. Bart Tyler, upon hearing that his top hand planned to leave the Diamond T to become a family man and run the Rowan homestead, rode into town in a fury. "You can't just throw away 5 years of work," he argued when he cornered Hank at the boarding house. "I promoted you to foreman last spring. You have responsibilities to the ranch." "I'm sorry, Mr. Tyler," Hank said firmly. "I've made my decision. The Rowan place may be smaller than the Diamond T, but it's good land. With proper management, it can support a family." "And what do you know about farming?" Bart scoffed. "You're a cattleman, not a dirt pusher." "I can learn," Hank replied, his jaw set in the stubborn line that anyone who knew him recognized as immovable. Bart studied him for a long moment, then sighed, his anger deflating. "You really love this woman and her young uns, don't you?" "Yes, sir, I do." "Well then." The older man shook his head, bemused. "I can't say I understand throwing away a promising career for a ready-made family, but I respect your choice. The offer stands if you ever change your mind." "I won't," Hank said with certainty, "but I appreciate your understanding." They shook hands, the tension dissipating into something like mutual respect. As Bart turned to leave, he paused. "One more thing, Thornton. That northeast section of the Rowan property borders Diamond T land. It's got good water access but poor soil. I'd be willing to trade you a section of our southern grazing land for it. Would give you better options for raising some cattle alongside your crops." The offer was generous, and Hank knew it. "I'll discuss it with Piper," he promised. It's her land, after all. Bart nodded, a grudging smile forming. She's got spirit, that one. Turned down my wife's charity 3 times after her husband died. Said she'd rather work her fingers to the bone than take handouts. That sounds like Piper, Hank agreed, affection warming his voice. You'll have your hands full, Bart warned, but there was a twinkle in his eye now. Strong women make for challenging wives but worthwhile marriages. My Eliza's been putting me through my paces for 30 years, and I wouldn't have it any other way. With that parting wisdom, the rancher departed, leaving Hank to ponder the unexpected support from a man he'd thought would be their biggest obstacle. When he told Piper about the conversation that evening, she was thoughtful. Would you be happier raising cattle than farming? She asked, always direct. They were sitting on the small porch of the nearly completed cabin, watching the sun set over the distant mountains while the children played a game of tag in the yard. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of the coming winter. I'd be happy doing whatever keeps this family fed and sheltered, Hank answered honestly. But yes, I know cattle better than crops. James had started with some basic farming, hadn't he? Piper nodded. Wheat mostly, and a vegetable garden for our own use. He had plans to expand, but then the winter came and the pneumonia. She trailed off, but her voice was steady, the grief an old familiar companion rather than a fresh wound. We could do both, Hank suggested. Take Bart's offer for the land swap, keep some acreage for crops and start a small herd. Build up gradually. Piper considered this, watching Emma chase Samuel around a pine tree, their laughter bright in the gathering dusk. It's not just my decision anymore, she said finally, turning back to Hank. This will be our land, our home. If you think the trade is fair and the plan is sound, I trust your judgment. The simple declaration of trust affected Hank more deeply than he expected. He reached for her hand, twining their fingers together. Partners, then, he said, in all things. She squeezed his hand in affirmation. Partners. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning, just 1 day after the Rowans moved back into their new home. The cabin gleamed with fresh-cut wood and new furnishings donated by the people of Helena. Quilts made by the town's women adorned the beds. Shelves built by Hank held Piper's, few salvaged belongings and new household items, and the stone fireplace stood solid and reassuring at the heart of the home. The ceremony was small but joyful. Martha Baker stood as witness for Piper, while, to everyone's surprise, Bart Tyler had asked to stand for Hank. Emma and Samuel walked their mother down the makeshift aisle, the path from the cabin to the old oak tree that had somehow survived the fire, while Martha's husband carried Lily, who was solemnly tasked with holding the simple gold band Hank had purchased for her mother. Piper wore a new dress of deep blue, sewn by the town's dressmaker as a wedding gift. Her honey-blonde hair was loose around her shoulders, adorned with a crown of late-blooming wildflowers that Emma had insisted on making that morning. To Hank, who waited beneath the oak tree in his best shirt and new vest, she had never looked more beautiful. Dearly beloved, Reverend Miller began, his voice carrying across the small gathering of friends and neighbors. We are gathered here today to witness the joining of Hank Thornton and Piper Rowan in holy matrimony. Their union, born in the crucible of fire and danger, has been forged through service, sacrifice, and the purest kind of love, one that risked everything to save another. As the Reverend spoke of commitment and partnership, Hank found himself unable to look away from Piper's face. In her eyes, he saw the same wonder he felt that out of tragedy had come this unexpected gift, this second chance at happiness for both of them. When it came time for the vows, Hank had prepared something special. Instead of repeating the traditional words after the Reverend, He took Piper's hands in his and spoke from the heart. "Piper, on the night of the fire, I made 3 trips into your burning home, but the truth is, I left my heart behind on the first one. Every time I went back, I was just trying to make myself whole again by making sure you and the children were safe." He took a deep breath, aware of the emotional hush that had fallen over the gathering. "I promise to keep that same determination in our life together, to always find a way through the flames, to never leave you facing danger alone, and to build a home with you that isn't just wood and stone, but love and courage and hope." Tears shimmered in Piper's eyes as she responded with her own vows. "Hank, you saved not just our lives but our future. When I had nothing left but my children and my pride, you showed me that accepting help isn't weakness and that starting over isn't defeat." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to face whatever comes with the same bravery you showed that night, and to make this house into a home filled with enough love to keep the darkest nights at bay." There wasn't a dry eye among the witnesses when Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife. As Hank bent to kiss his bride, Emma and Samuel cheered, while Lily reached up to pat both their faces, as if blessing the union in her own toddler way. The celebration that followed was simple but heartfelt, with food provided by the women of Helena and music from a fiddle player who had ridden in from a neighboring ranch. As afternoon turned to evening, the guests departed, leaving the new family alone in their home for the first time. After the children were tucked into bed, all 3 insisting that both Mama and Pa had to tell stories and give kisses, Hank and Piper stood on the porch, looking out at their land in the moonlight. The scars of the fire were still visible, but new growth was already beginning to emerge, green shoots pushing through the blackened earth with stubborn determination. "It's like us," Piper murmured, following his gaze. "Renewal after destruction." Hank pulled her close, breathing in the scent of wildflowers still clinging to her hair. "The fire took your home but gave you a husband. Fair trade," she laughed softly, turning in his arms to face him. "More than fair," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him with a passion that promised many such moments in the years to come. Later that night, in the privacy of their new bedroom, they came together as husband and wife, their union as natural and right as if they had been meant for each other from the beginning. Perhaps they had been, Hank thought as Piper curled against him afterward, her breathing deep and even in sleep. Perhaps the fire had merely revealed what was already written in the stars, that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, if we're brave enough to walk through the flames and emerge on the other side. 5 years passed, bringing changes to the Thornton homestead that Hank and Piper could scarcely have imagined on their wedding day. The land had healed from the fire, green pastures replacing the charred earth, new trees growing where old ones had stood. The cabin had expanded with the addition of 2 rooms necessary after the birth of twin boys, James and Henry, in their 2nd year of marriage. The land swap with the Diamond T had proven fortunate. Under Hank's careful management, a modest herd of cattle now grazed the southern pastures, while wheat and vegetables thrived in the fertile northern fields. They weren't wealthy by any measure, but the family wanted for nothing essential, and had the satisfaction of self-sufficiency that was the hallmark of frontier success. The children had thrived as well. Emma, now 11, was the spitting image of her mother, with the same honey-blonde hair and determined spirit. She helped with the younger children and had recently begun riding out with Hank to check the cattle, showing an aptitude for ranch work that made him secretly proud. Samuel, 9 and full of mischief, was more interested in building things, always constructing elaborate forts for himself and his siblings from whatever materials he could find. Lily, at 7, was the family artist, drawing pictures on any available surface and making up stories to accompany them. The twins, 3 years old and identical in appearance but opposite in temperament, completed the family circle. James was serious and watchful, while Henry was all laughter and impulse. Together, they were a whirlwind of activity that kept Piper and Hank constantly on their toes. Life wasn't without its challenges. They had weathered drought, blizzards, and a scarlet fever outbreak that had swept through Helena 2 winters ago, taking several children but mercifully sparing the Thornton brood. Through it all, the partnership Hank and Piper had vowed on their wedding day remained strong, each difficulty faced together with the same determination that had seen them through the fire. On the 5th anniversary of that fateful night, Hank rose before dawn, pressing a gentle kiss to Piper's forehead before slipping out of bed. She stirred but didn't wake, exhausted from a long day of preserving the last of the summer vegetables for winter storage. He moved quietly through the sleeping house, checking on each child before stepping out onto the porch. The October air was crisp, the sky beginning to lighten in the east. He walked to the old oak tree taller now, its branches spreading wide, and stood beneath it, remembering. He didn't hear Piper approach until her arms slipped around his waist from behind, her cheek pressing against his back. "You're up early," she murmured. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, turning to gather her into his arms. "Kept thinking about what day it is." She nodded against his chest. 5 years since the fire. 5 years since you came charging in like some hero from Emma's storybooks. "I was scared out of my wits," he confessed, something he had never told her before. "When I saw those flames, heard your voice, I didn't think, just acted." "That's what makes you who you are," Piper said, looking up at him with the same admiration that had been there from the beginning. "You see what needs doing and you do it, regardless of the risk." Hank smoothed a strand of hair from her face. At 30, Piper was more beautiful to him than she had been at 25, the passing years adding character and depth to her features rather than diminishing her beauty. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Not much, but I wanted to mark the day." He handed her a small wooden box he had carved himself, the lid etched with a simple design of flames surrounding a cabin. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a delicate silver locket. "Hank," she breathed, lifting it carefully. "It's beautiful. Open it," he urged. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, one of the 5 children, crowded together and smiling, and one of Hank and Piper on their wedding day, their faces alight with joy. "So you'll always have us close to your heart," Hank explained, "even when we're driving you to distraction." Piper laughed, tears gathering in her eyes. "As if I could ever forget any of you for a moment." She turned, lifting her hair so he could fasten the locket around her neck. "Thank you. It's perfect." They stood together beneath the oak tree, watching the sun rise over the mountains. In the growing light, Hank could see the cabin that had become a true home, the fields and pastures that sustained them, and most precious of all, the woman beside him who had given him a family and a purpose. "Do you ever wonder," Piper asked quietly, "what would have happened if you hadn't been riding by that night? If someone else had seen the fire or no one at all?" Hank considered the question seriously. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "But then, I remember something my pa used to say, that life has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be, exactly when we need to be there." "Providence," Piper murmured, echoing her words from that long-ago conversation in Martha's boarding house. "Maybe so," Hank agreed. "Or maybe just the best kind of luck. Either way, I thank God every day that I was the one who saw those flames." "As do I," Piper said, her hand finding his. "Every single day. the peaceful moment was broken by a childish shout from the cabin. "Ma, Pa, the twins are eating flour again." They laughed, the spell of reminiscence broken by the immediate demands of family life. As they walked hand in hand back toward the house and the beautiful chaos that awaited them inside, Hank felt a profound sense of rightness settle over him. 5 years ago, he had made 3 desperate trips through a burning building, driven by instinct and courage. He couldn't have known then that each journey was also carrying him toward his future, a future filled with love, purpose, and the kind of happiness he had never imagined possible. Some men searched their whole lives for meaning and never found it. Hank Thornton had found his in the heart of a fire, in the courage of a widow who refused to surrender to despair, and in the family they had built together from the ashes of tragedy. As they reached the porch, Piper paused, turning to him with a smile that still had the power to take his breath away. "I love you, Hank Thornton," she said simply, "through fire and all that comes after." "And I love you, Piper Thornton," he replied, sealing the words with a kiss as the sun rose fully over their land, promising another day of the life they had created together, a life as rich and fulfilling as any 2 people could hope for in this wild, beautiful, unforgiving country they called home. Inside the cabin, Emma had already taken charge, wiping flour from the twins' faces while Samuel entertained Lily with exaggerated tales of how much trouble their little brothers would be in when Ma and Pa came inside. The scene was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, a family going about the business of a new day, unaware that the very fact of their existence together was something of a miracle. As Hank and Piper crossed the threshold, 5 pairs of eyes turned toward them, each face reflecting some combination of their features, personalities, and spirits. In those beloved faces, Hank saw everything that mattered, past, present, and future, bound together in bonds stronger than blood, forged in fire and tempered by love. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, just as they had faced the flames all those years ago, with courage, determination, and an unwavering faith in each other that had proven stronger than any adversity. This was their legacy. This was their home. This was their love story, written not in grand gestures or flowery words, but in the daily acts of caring and commitment that had transformed a desperate rescue into a life of shared purpose and joy. Outside, the old oak tree stood sentinel over the homestead, its branches reaching toward the endless Montana sky, a silent witness to the power of love to overcome tragedy, to heal what was broken, and to build something enduring from the ashes of what was lost. And beneath its spreading canopy, where a cowboy had once made his vows to a widow and her children, new memories would continue to be made: birthdays and anniversaries, departures and returns, all the moments, large and small, that make up a family's history. For in the end, that was what Hank Thornton had truly rescued from the flames that night: not just 5 lives, but the possibility of countless moments yet to come, a future that would stretch far beyond what any of them could imagine as they gathered around the breakfast table on this ordinary, miraculous morning, 5 years after the fire that had changed everything.